The call came from the Mensah-Boateng campaign office on a Tuesday morning in March. A background verification. Standard procedure for a parliamentary candidate's family members. Could Miss Efua Asante please confirm her date of birth, her university of graduation, and the year her degree was awarded? Efua was sitting at her desk in Kumasi when she took the call. She answered every question correctly. Date of birth, university, year of graduation, first-class honours in economics. There was a pause on the line. Miss Asante, the woman said carefully, our records show that the degree from this institution was already claimed by a Mrs. Adwoa Mensah-Boateng, who is listed as your sister. Efua looked out the window at the street below. A market woman was arranging oranges into a pyramid. A child on a bicycle was trying to balance a bag of groundnuts on the handlebars. The Tuesday morning was doing what Tuesday mornings do. Yes, Efua said, she is my sister. Another pause. Miss Asante, which one of you actually graduated? Efua set her pen down. I did, she said. I'll send you the originals. Let's start where every story like this starts. At the beginning, before anyone did anything wrong, when the two daughters of Daniel and Grace Asante were simply two daughters. Efua was the eldest by 3 years, serious, precise, the kind of child who organized her school books by subject and color before the term started and then reorganized them by frequency of use after the first week. She inherited her father's mind, systematic, thorough, built for the long game. She was not the daughter who filled rooms. She was the daughter who understood them. Adwoa was the kind of person who filled rooms, 3 years younger, lighter in complexion, with her mother's round warmth and something extra, a social instinct that was almost physical, the ability to read what a room needed and provide it within minutes of walking in. People liked Adwoa immediately. They liked Efua eventually, once they understood her. The difference was timing, and timing, as anyone who has ever been in a family where 2 children are compared, is everything. Their father, Daniel Asante, was a headmaster who had built his entire life around the conviction that education was the only inheritance that couldn't be stolen or mortgaged or consumed. He sent both daughters to good schools. He saved for both their universities. He told them both, separately and often, that a degree was the thing nobody could take from you. He was wrong about that, but he didn't know it yet. Efua went to the University of Ghana in 2007. She studied economics. She worked harder than anyone around her because she understood, with the specific clarity of a first daughter who has been paying attention, that the ground beneath her was not as solid as it looked, and that performance was the most reliable form of security available to her. She graduated in 2010 with first-class honours. Her father cried at the graduation. Her mother took 40 photographs. Adwoa, 17 years old and already more beautiful than anyone in the family knew what to do with, stood beside her sister in the photographs and smiled the smile of someone who is thinking about something else. Adwoa did not go to university. Not because she wasn't intelligent, she was, but because the opportunity she had identified did not require a degree. It required a man, and the man she had identified required a wife who matched his family's expectations. The Mensah-Boatengs were one of Accra's established families. Old money, political connections, social position. They did not receive daughters-in-law who had not been educated. Adwoa was 23 years old, and she had made a calculation that she told herself was practical. It was 2010. Efua's degree certificate was in a frame on the wall of their parents' house in Kumasi. One Thursday afternoon in November, when their parents were visiting their aunt in Takoradi, Adwoa took the certificate from the frame. She had it photographed. She had copies made. She returned the original to its frame. She did not tell Efua. She presented herself to the Mensah-Boateng family as Adwoa Asante, economics graduate, first-class honours, University of Ghana. The wedding was in 2011. And here is what I want you to hold before we go any further. Efua Asante was not naive. She was not a woman who wandered into this situation without understanding how the world worked. She had watched her mother run a business from a front room and absorbed every lesson. She had a first-class degree. She understood documentation and the way informal agreements become invisible when convenience requires it. She had suggested putting only Kofi's name on the company registration because she trusted him. That is the thing about this story that sits in you for a long time. The betrayal was not built on her ignorance. It was built on her faith. But that is a different episode. In this one, the faith belonged to a father who had told his daughters that education was the one thing nobody could take from them. He was wrong about that. But it would take 8 years for the family to find out exactly how wrong he had been and who had been the one to prove it. And here is what I need you to understand about those 8 years before we get to the phone call. Efua went back to Kumasi. She got a job at a microfinance institution. She was promoted in her second year. By year 4, she was managing a portfolio of small business clients and had identified 3 operational inefficiencies in the loan approval process that, when corrected, reduced default rates by 18%. She turned down a job in Accra because her parents were aging and Kumasi was home. She had chosen the actual life over the constructed one. Every day, somewhere underneath all of it, she knew what Adwoa had done. She knew, and she carried it, and she did not say anything, not to Adwoa, not to her parents, not to Kwame, not to anyone, not because she was afraid, because she understood that some truths carry themselves. You do not need to deliver them. You simply need to stay in one place long enough for them to arrive. The certificate was still in the frame on the wall, slightly crooked. She straightened it every time she visited. She was waiting. Here is what happened to each sister in the 8 years between Adwoa's wedding and the phone call. Adwoa became Mrs. Adwoa Mensah-Boateng. She moved into the Mensah-Boateng family home in Accra, a large, well-staffed compound in East Legon, and she did what she had always been good at. She charmed Kwame's mother within a month. She navigated the family's social calendar with the precision of someone who had been preparing for exactly this environment her entire life. She dressed the right way, appeared at the right events, said the right things to the right people. When Kwame began his political career first as a council representative, then as a candidate for parliament, Adwoa stood beside him at every function and was photographed beside him at every event and was, by every external measure, exactly what the Mensah-Boateng family had hoped she would be. The degree was never checked. Nobody checked it. Why would they? She had presented it. She had the transcript. She spoke fluently about economics when the occasion required it, and she was smart enough that the occasions were few, because smart people know when to demonstrate knowledge and when to let the impression of it do the work. Kwame did not know. He had never known. He had married the woman his family approved of, and she had been, by every measure he applied, exactly what she presented herself as. The only thing he did not know was what she had presented herself as was not entirely her own. Now let's look at Efua. Efua stayed in Kumasi. She got a job at a microfinance institution the year after she graduated entry-level, accounts work, nothing glamorous. She was promoted in the second year. By year 4, she was managing a portfolio of small business clients and had identified 3 operational inefficiencies in the institution's loan approval process that, when corrected, reduced default rates by 18%. By year 6, she had been headhunted by a larger financial institution in Accra. She turned it down because her parents were aging and Kumasi was where they were. She did not marry. Not because no one asked, someone did. A quiet man named Atto who loved her carefully for 2 years before she gently told him she wasn't ready. She did not fully understand why she wasn't ready until later, when she had time to examine it honestly. There was something in her that had been watching Adwoa's life from a distance for 8 years and had been performing a calculation about what it cost. She had not named it. She had not confronted it. She had simply been living her life, building her career, caring for her parents, growing into the person she was becoming and carrying, somewhere underneath all of it, the knowledge of what her sister had done. She had known from the beginning. She had come home 2 weeks after the wedding and noticed the frame was slightly crooked. She had straightened it. She had looked at the certificate. She had done the arithmetic. She had not said anything. Not to Adwoa. Not to her parents. Not to Kwame. Not to anyone. She had decided consciously, in the quiet of her own bedroom in the house where she had grown up, that the truth would arrive when it was ready. She would not carry it to anyone. She would simply carry herself correctly and wait. 8 years later, a campaign office called asking for verification. The truth was ready. And I want to be precise about the nature of that readiness. Efua had not been plotting. She had not been collecting evidence in anticipation of a specific confrontation. She had been living, working, growing, caring for her parents, becoming the person she was, and carrying a known truth that she had judged was not yet necessary to speak. The campaign background check changed the calculus. When a third party asked the question directly when the truth was required by an official process rather than being a private burden, the moment of necessity had arrived. She answered calmly. She confirmed what was real. She sent the originals because she had always kept the originals, not as ammunition, but as records, because she was the kind of person who documented things as a form of self-respect. And then she called her father, because he deserved to hear it from her before he heard it from anyone else. She had waited 8 years for the right moment. This was not the right moment. There is no right moment for this kind of news. But it was the necessary one. And Efua Asante, who had understood the difference between those two things since she was old enough to organize her school books by subject and frequency of use, knew exactly what to do with a necessary moment when it arrived. And here is what I want you to notice about those 8 years. Not Adwoa's 8 years, but Efua's. She had built a career on the actual degree, the actual mind. The first-class honours she had actually earned. She had done this without fanfare, without complaint, without ever referencing the parallel version of her credentials her sister was using in East Legon. She went to work every morning at the microfinance institution, was promoted on the basis of work, identified efficiencies that reduced default rates by 18%, turned down a job in Accra because her parents were aging and Kumasi was home. She had chosen Kumasi over Accra, her parents over ambition, the actual life over the constructed one. And every day, somewhere in the background of all of that, she had known. She had known and not said anything, not because she was afraid, not because silence would benefit her, but because she understood that some truths carry themselves. You do not need to deliver them. You simply need to stay in one place long enough for them to arrive. The campaign office called on a Tuesday morning in March, and the truth arrived. Let me tell you about the 24 hours after that phone call. Efua sent the originals that afternoon. Not copies, the actual certificates, the actual transcripts, the actual documentation from the University of Ghana that confirmed that Efua Asante, born in 1987 in Kumasi, had graduated with first-class honours in economics in 2010. She sent them by courier with a covering letter. Calm, factual, 3 paragraphs. She did not editorialize, she did not accuse, she simply documented what was true and sent it to the people who had asked. Then she called her father. This is the part of the story that costs me something to tell. Daniel Asante, retired headmaster, the man who had built his entire identity around the conviction that education was the only inheritance that couldn't be taken from you, sat in his chair in Kumasi and listened to his eldest daughter explain what his youngest daughter had done. He was quiet for a very long time. Efua, he said finally, how long have you known? Since the wedding, she said. Another silence. Longer. Why didn't you tell me? She thought about this. She had thought about it for 8 years. Actually, the question of what telling would have cost, what it would have broken, who it would have hurt, and in what order. She had run the calculation so many times, it had stopped feeling like a calculation and started feeling like a fact of life. Because I was waiting, she said, for the right moment. And this is the right moment? No, she said honestly, but it's the necessary one. Her father said nothing for a while. She could hear him breathing, the careful breathing of a man who is deciding something. "I will call your mother," he said, "and then I will call Adwoa." "Papa." "No," he said. "This is mine to do." Meanwhile in Accra, in the East Legon compound, Kwame's campaign manager had received Efua's documents and was sitting in his office looking at 2 certificates from the same university, same program, same year, with different names on them. He called Kwame's personal number. Kwame didn't answer. He called the campaign director. The campaign director called the lawyer. By evening, the Mensah-Boateng household knew that something was wrong. They did not yet know the shape of it. But Kwame had been in politics long enough to recognize the specific atmosphere of a room that knows more than it is saying. He went upstairs to find Adwoa. She was sitting at her dressing table. She saw him in the mirror before he spoke. And her expression, the expression of a woman who has been waiting for this conversation for 8 years and has been hoping every day that it would not come, told him everything before she said a word. Let me stay here for a moment. Because this scene, Kwame, walking into the bedroom and seeing his wife's expression in the mirror, is the moment the lie ends. Not when Efua sent the documents. Not when the campaign office called. Here, in this room, in the mirror, in the silence before a word was spoken. Adwoa had been carrying this for 8 years in the way certain people carry things they know are wrong, not with guilt exactly, but with a permanent low-level awareness that the foundation of a particular part of their life is less solid than it appears. She had been charming and capable and genuinely useful to Kwame's political career. She had done real work in their marriage, but underneath all of it, there had always been the certificate. The photograph she had taken in a print shop in Kumasi. The name she had walked into a family meeting wearing like a coat that belonged to someone else. Kwame closed the bedroom door very quietly, and somehow that was more significant than if he had slammed it. He stood at the door and looked at his wife in the mirror. "Tell me," he said, "what I'm about to find out." Adwoa put her phone down on the dressing table. She turned to face him directly, not in the mirror, the way you face someone when the mirror version of a conversation is over. "I used Efua's degree," she said. "When we met, I presented her qualifications as mine." He looked at her for a long time, not with the explosive anger she might have feared, because anger is easier to respond to than stillness. He was still, completely still. "My family approved of you because of that degree." "Yes." "My campaign verification was triggered by that degree." "Yes." He turned to the window. Outside, the compound was its usual self-guards at the gate, garden lights coming on the ordinary atmosphere of a household that did not yet know what the woman at the dressing table had been carrying for 8 years. "I'm not angry about what you did to me," he said finally. "I'm angry about what you did to her." There was nothing to say to that, so she said nothing. He picked up his phone, made 2 calls, and said, "We're going to Kumasi, not to fix it, to face it. Do you understand the difference?" She said she did. She wasn't sure she did yet, but she said it. Kwame Mensah-Boateng closed the bedroom door. He was not a man who raised his voice. He had been in politics long enough to understand that volume was almost always a sign of lost control, and he did not lose control. He stood at the door and looked at his wife in the mirror and said, quietly, "Tell me what I'm about to find out." Adwoa turned from the mirror. She had been preparing for this moment for 8 years, in the same way that certain people prepare for things they know are coming and cannot stop, not by planning what to say, but by building a version of themselves that could survive the saying of it. She was composed. She had always been composed under pressure. It was one of her genuine gifts. "I used Efua's degree," she said, "when we met. I told your family I had her qualifications." He looked at her for a long time. "My family approved of you because of that degree," he said. "Yes." "My campaign background check was triggered by that degree." "Yes." "And Efua, your sister, she knew?" A pause. "I believe she knew. We never discussed it." "She never came to you?" "No." He turned away from her and looked at the window. Outside, the compound was, as it always was, the guards at the gate, the garden lights coming on in the early evening, The ordinary evening of a household that had no idea that the woman at the dressing table upstairs had been living on borrowed credentials for 8 years. "Adwoa," he said, "I'm not angry about what you did to me." She looked at him. "I'm angry about what you did to her." She didn't answer. What was there to say to that? Efua had spent 8 weeks watching her sister live inside her credentials and had said nothing. Had built her own career without them, without the Mensah-Boateng name, without the Accra social circuit, without anything except the actual degree and the actual mind that had earned it, and had waited. Kwame picked up his phone. He called his campaign manager and told him to pause all verification communications pending a family discussion. Then he put the phone in his pocket and said, "We need to go to Kumasi." "Kwame, not to fix it," he said, "to face it." Notice that. He said, not to fix it, to face it. 8 years of borrowed credentials. 8 years of his family accepting a woman on the basis of qualifications she had photographed in a Kumasi print shop. 8 years of campaign materials referencing his wife's educated background. And his first instinct was not to call communications, not to strategize, not to ask how to contain it. It was to drive to Kumasi, to sit in a room with the people who were owed something, to face it. He sat beside Adwoa for 3 hours in that car without speaking about strategy. In the first hour, he said nothing. Then, "Did you ever think about telling me?" she said. "Every day." "Why didn't you?" She looked out the window at the road. "Because I thought you would leave," she said. He didn't answer that immediately. He looked at the road. "I might have," he said finally, "in the beginning, but not now." She looked at him. "Not now," he said again, "but we're going to do this correctly, whatever it costs." What it cost, in the end, was less than either of them feared. But we'll get to that, because I want to tell you about the drive. 3 hours from Accra to Kumasi with Kwame and Adwoa in the same car, and the silence between them was not the silence of 2 people who have nothing to say. It was the silence of 2 people who have said everything that needed to be said in that bedroom and are now simply moving toward what comes next. At some point past the midway mark, Adwoa said, "I did build a life with you. What I did before doesn't erase what I became." Kwame was quiet for a long time. "No," he said finally, "it doesn't. But it changes what the foundation was, and I needed to know what the foundation was." She looked at her hands. "And now you do." "And now I do," he agreed. They did not speak again until they reached Kumasi, but the silence that followed that exchange was different from the silence before it. Less brittle, more honest. It was, Adwoa would think later, possibly the most truthful conversation she had ever had with her husband, and it had barely used any words. There is a particular kind of honesty that only becomes available when there is nothing left to protect. They had arrived at it by accident, but they were in it now, and that, as it turned out, was the beginning of something different. 8 years of a lie. And when it finally arrived in his living room, his first instinct was not to manage it, but to account for it. Not every man in this story behaved the way you might expect. Kwame Mensah-Boateng, for all that his campaign was built on a credential that wasn't his wife's, turned out to be the one person in the room who understood immediately what was actually owed. They drove to Kumasi the following morning, Kwame and Adwoa, in Kwame's car, with the particular silence of 2 people who have said everything that needs to be said and are now simply moving toward what comes next. Efua was already there. She had gone to her parents' house the evening before, not because she had been summoned, but because she understood that what was coming would be easier on her parents if someone they trusted was present. She had made tea. She had sat with her father while he processed what she had told him. She had held her mother's hand when Grace Asante began to cry, not from anger, but from the specific grief of a mother who realizes she has been protecting the wrong version of a story for 8 years. Daniel Asante was waiting in the sitting room when Kwame and Adwoa arrived. He was wearing his good shirt, the navy one he kept for church and for occasions that required dignity. He was 70 years old, and he sat very straight and he looked at his youngest daughter when she came through the door with an expression that Adwoa had never seen on her father's face before and would not forget. Not anger. Disappointment has a different texture than anger. Anger burns outward. Disappointment settles inward, quiet and heavy, and it is much harder to survive. Efua sat in the corner. She was there, but she was not making herself the centre of it, she had decided, on the drive from her apartment to her parents' house, that the reckoning that was about to happen in this room was not hers to conduct. She had spent 8 years not conducting it. She could wait a little longer. Adwoa sat down. She did not perform composure this time. She simply sat and looked at her father and let him speak. Daniel spoke for a long time. He talked about what education had meant in this family, about the sacrifices he had made to send both daughters to good schools, about the graduation in 2010. He had cried that day, he said, because he believed something had been accomplished that could not be undone, about what he had told them both. A degree is the thing nobody can take from you. And then, he said, very quietly, you took it. The room was silent. Adwoa. To her credit, and I want to be fair to her here, because no story is a story if one person is only a villain, did not deflect. She did not explain. She did not list the reasons, or the pressures, or the calculations she had made at 23 years old. She simply said, I know, Papa. I'm sorry. It was not enough. It was also the most honest thing she had said in 8 years, and in the economy of this moment, it was what she had. Kwame sat beside her. He had said nothing since they arrived. Now he looked at Efua. What do you need from us? He asked. Not what we can offer. What do you actually need? Efua looked at him. She looked at her sister. She looked at her father. She said, I need my name back. The room was quiet after she said it. She did not say, I need an apology. I need compensation. I need Adwoa punished. I need the campaign to fail. She said, I need my name back, the specific thing that had been taken, the specific thing that existed in official records as belonging to someone who had not earned it. Her father looked at her the way he had looked at her at graduation. Not pride exactly, recognition, the specific recognition of a parent who understands, in a single sentence, exactly who their child is. Your name was never gone, he said quietly. It was simply in the wrong place. Yes, Efua said, and I want it back in the right one. Kwame was already on the phone. The documents were already moving. Efua sat in the sitting room of her parents' house and waited one more time, not from uncertainty, but from the specific patience of someone who has done everything that needs doing and is simply letting the world catch up. It caught up. And here is what I want you to notice about the way Efua handled every step of that afternoon. She had been in that sitting room as a presence solid, calm, the still centre of a scene that was moving fast around her. She had not orchestrated it. She had not managed it. She had not positioned herself or performed her pain or extracted acknowledgement from anyone. She had said, I need my name back. And then she had trusted the room to do the rest. Because that is who Efua Asante was. She had spent 8 years trusting that what is real will eventually be confirmed by reality. She had been right. The confirmation had arrived from a campaign office in Accra on a Tuesday morning, dressed in the formal language of a background verification. She had answered it correctly and sent the originals and called her father. The rest had followed, the way things follow when the first fact is correct and everything that comes after is built on it. She had her name back. The record had been corrected. The original certificate was back in its rightful place in the official archive, the one with her name on it, the one she had actually earned, the one her father had cried at and her mother had photographed 40 times. Let me be clear about what Efua was asking for. Because I need my name back is a sentence that could mean many things. Legal action, public correction, compensation, the specific satisfaction of watching a lie be unmade in front of people who believed it. What Efua meant was simpler and more permanent than any of those things. She meant she wanted the record corrected, everywhere. The university's alumni records, the Mensah-Boateng family's understanding of who they had admitted into their household, the campaign's verification files. Her own professional history, which had been built entirely on her actual credentials, but which had existed for 8 years in the shadow of the version her sister was using. She did not want Adwoa destroyed. She had had 8 years to want that and had not wanted it. She did not want Kwame's campaign derailed on her behalf. She did not want her parents to spend the rest of their lives explaining a scandal. She wanted the truth on paper, in the places where truth on paper matters, and she wanted it done correctly. Kwame understood this immediately. He called his lawyer from the sitting room right there, in front of all of them, and instructed that the campaign verification be corrected to reflect the actual degree holder. Then he called his campaign manager and told him the background check had identified an administrative error in the family records that was being corrected. Administrative error. Efua noticed that framing. She did not object to it. The truth was in the documents. What it was called in press statements was a separate matter, and one she was willing to leave to the people who had to live with its consequences in public. What happened next was the part that no one had scripted. Adwoa turned to Efua in the sitting room of their parents' house and said, 8 years. You knew for 8 years and you never said anything. No, Efua said. Why? And Efua looked at her sister, the woman who had worn her credentials like a coat and lived inside a life built on them for 8 years, and she said something that the room did not expect. Because you're my sister. And I decided a long time ago that the truth would come for you eventually. I wasn't going to be the one who brought it, but I was also never going to pretend it wasn't there. Adwoa looked at her. That's not forgiveness, she said. No, Efua agreed. It's not. But it's what I have. Their mother was crying again. Their father had his hands folded in his lap and was looking at the floor. Kwame was on his second phone call. The house was doing what houses do when the thing that has been held at a distance for years finally arrives inside the walls. It became very quiet and very full at the same time. Efua picked up her bag. She stood. The documents are already with the university, she said. And with the campaign office. Everything that needs to happen on paper is happening. What happens between all of you that's not mine? She kissed her mother. She squeezed her father's hand. She did not look at Adwoa again. But let me stay in that sitting room a moment longer before she leaves, because I want you to understand what the conversation with her father cost her, not the revelation itself, but watching him absorb it. Daniel Asante had spent his entire professional life teaching other people's children that honesty was the foundation of everything. He had said this to his own daughters at the dinner table on the drive to university in 2007. This degree will be yours. Nobody can take it from you. Adwoa had taken it, and he had not known. What Efua saw in her father's face when she told him the expression of a man discovering that the principle he built his life around had been violated in his own household, that was the heaviest thing she had carried for 8 years. Not what Adwoa had done to her. The anticipation of what telling would do to him. Why didn't you tell me? He asked. Because you would have had to do something about it. And I didn't want to make you choose between your daughters before you had to. He was quiet a long time. That, he said, was either the most generous thing you have ever done or the most foolish. Both, she said, probably both. He almost smiled. She walked out of the house, through the gate, into the Kumasi street. But let me stay in that sitting room a moment longer, because I want you to understand what the conversation with her father cost her. Not the revelation she had been carrying that for 8 years, and the weightlifting was a relief. What cost her was watching her father absorb it. Daniel Asante had spent his entire life teaching other people's children that honesty was the foundation of everything. He had said this to his own daughters at the dinner table, at the school gate, on the drive to university in 2007. This degree will be yours. Nobody can take it from you. Adwoa had taken it. And Daniel had not known. What Efua saw in her father's face when she told him the expression of a man discovering that what he built his life around had been violated in his own household by his own child, that was the thing that had cost Efua the most to carry. Not the injustice of what Adwoa had done to her. The anticipation of what telling would do to him. She had been right to wait until the moment was necessary rather than merely the moment she could no longer hold it. The campaign office's call had made the telling necessary. Nothing before that had. "Why didn't you tell me?" her father asked. "Because you would have had to do something about it," she said, "and I didn't want to make you choose between your daughters before you had to." He looked at her a long time. "That," he said slowly, "was either the most generous thing you have ever done or the most foolish." "Both," she said. "Probably both." He almost smiled. Almost. Not quite. The same street she had grown up on. The market women were setting up for the morning. The air smelled like groundnut soup from a neighbour's kitchen. Everything was entirely ordinary, which is how the most significant moments of a life usually announce themselves. She got in her car, she sat for a moment, and then she drove. But before we leave that sitting room, one more thing happened after Efua left. Kwame turned to Adwoa. "What are you going to do?" "About what?" "About the fact that your sister has spent 8 years being you, the real version of you, without any of the things that were supposed to come with it." Adwoa looked at her hands. "I can't give her back 8 years." "No," Kwame agreed, "but you can stop pretending they didn't happen." Daniel Asante, silent since Efua left, looked up at his son-in-law. "You are a better man than I initially gave you credit for," he said. Not a compliment delivered easily. Kwame received it with a nod. Grace Asante was still crying softly. She would cry for 3 days, not from anger, but from the grief of a mother who realizes she has been watching her children for 30 years and still missed something this large. She called Efua 12 times in those days. Efua answered every time. They talked about the garden, the neighbour's dog, a recipe Grace had found. The conversations themselves were what mattered, not what was said in them. Now let's talk about what happened in Kumasi while Kwame was making phone calls in the sitting room, because Daniel Asante did something that afternoon that I think you need to know about. After Efua left, and after Kwame had made his calls, and after Adwoa had stopped trying to compose herself and had simply sat quietly in the chair she had been in since they arrived, Daniel stood up. He walked to his bookshelf. He took down the graduation photograph from 2010. He set it on the table in front of Adwoa. In the photograph, Efua is in her graduation gown, holding her certificate. Adwoa is beside her, smiling. Their father is behind them both, his hands on their shoulders, his face the face of a man whose belief system has just been confirmed. He tapped the certificate in the photograph. He did not say anything. He put the photograph back on the shelf. He sat down. That was all. And 3 months later, in the specific way that things resolve when everyone involved is trying, however imperfectly, to do the right thing, Kwame Mensah-Boateng wrote a letter to Efua, not from the campaign office. Personally, in his own handwriting, he had been consulting with colleagues about a financial advisory role for a constituency development initiative, a community microfinance program. Everyone he spoke to in Kumasi told him the same name, Efua Asante, the woman at the microfinance institution who had reduced default rates by 18% and turned down a job in Accra to stay close to her parents. He wrote, "I should have known your name before I knew your sisters. I am sorry it took this long to find it." She read the letter twice. She set it down. She picked up her pen and wrote back. Not because she forgave him, he had not, in the end, done anything that required her forgiveness. Not because she was making peace with what Adwoa had done, that was a longer and more complicated process that she was still in the middle of, but because the letter contained an opportunity, and Efua Asante had spent 8 years building exactly the skills the opportunity required, and she was not in the habit of letting the right moment pass because the people who created it were complicated. She got in her car. She sat for a moment. And then she drove. There was one more thing. Kwame turned to Adwoa and said, "What are you going to do?" "About what?" "About the fact that your sister has spent 8 years being you, the real version of you, without any of the things that were supposed to come with it." Adwoa looked at her hands. "I can't give her back 8 years." "No," Kwame agreed, "but you can stop pretending they didn't happen." Daniel Asante, who had been silent since Efua left, looked up at his son-in-law. "You are a better man than I initially gave you credit for," he said. It was not a compliment, delivered easily. Kwame received it with a nod and said nothing. Grace Asante was still crying softly. She would cry, on and off, for 3 days, not from anger or shame, but from the grief of a mother who realizes she has been watching her children for 30 years and still missed something this large. She called Efua 12 times in those days. Efua answered every time. They talked about the garden, about the neighbor's dog, about a recipe Grace had found. The conversations themselves were what mattered. It took 6 weeks for everything to settle. The university corrected its alumni records. Efua Asante, first-class honours in economics 2010, was listed correctly. The Mensah-Boateng campaign issued a quiet clarification to the verification body administrative error in family documentation, and the issue did not become public, which was what Kwame had hoped and what Efua had privately allowed by not pursuing it further. Adwoa and Kwame remained married. That surprised some people who heard the story second-hand. It did not surprise Efua. Kwame was a man who valued accountability over appearance. She had understood that from the sitting room in Kumasi when he called his lawyer in front of everyone and Adwoa, confronted finally with the full weight of what she had built her life on, was doing the work of becoming someone she could look at more directly. Whether that would hold was not Efua's to know. It was theirs. Daniel Asante did not speak to Adwoa for 3 months. Then, because he was a man who had spent his life teaching that truth was the beginning of something rather than the end of it, he called her. He did not forgive easily. But he called. And Efua. Efua went back to Kumasi, back to her desk at the microfinance institution, back to the portfolio of small business clients she had been managing for years. Nothing changed in her daily life except one thing. The weight she had been carrying, the specific, invisible weight of a known truth that has been consciously and deliberately not spoken, was gone. She had not realized how heavy it was until it was no longer there. 3 months after the verification call, she received a letter from the Mensah-Boateng family, not from Kwame's campaign office, but from Kwame personally. He had been speaking to colleagues about a financial advisory role attached to his constituency development fund, a community microfinance initiative. He had been told that the best person in Kumasi for that kind of work was someone named Efua Asante. He wrote, "I should have known your name before I knew your sister's. I am sorry it took this long to find it." She read the letter twice. She set it down on her desk. Outside her window, Kumasi was doing what Kumasi does, busy, loud, alive, with the ordinary commerce of people building things and buying things and moving through their days. She had lived here her whole adult life. She had built something real here, on her own actual credentials, without a borrowed name or a borrowed degree or anyone else's story to stand inside. She picked up her pen and wrote back. "And that is the thing I want you to hold at the end of this story. Not the correction of the record, though, that mattered. Not the conversation in the sitting room, though, that was necessary. The thing I want you to hold is this. Efua Asante spent 8 years watching her sister live inside her credentials and chose every single day not to tear that life down, not from weakness, not from fear, from the specific strength of someone who trusted that what is real does not need to be defended, only documented. She had been right. Like the Sankofa bird, she did not look back to return to the wound. She looked back to collect what had always been hers, her name, her record, her truth. And when the moment came, not because she forced it, but because the world eventually asks for the original, she was ready. She had always been ready. She just hadn't needed to show it until now. And that is what I want to leave you with. Because this story is not about patience as a passive thing, the waiting, the not speaking, the 8 years of carrying a known truth without deploying it. Efua's patience was not the patience of someone who had accepted a situation. It was the patience of someone who had assessed it, made a judgment about when and how it should be resolved, and proceeded accordingly. She had assessed, the truth will arrive, not maybe, not if conditions are right. It will arrive, because truth surfaces when the stakes become high enough for someone to go looking for it. she had judged. Speak when speaking is necessary, not when it becomes convenient or satisfying. She had proceeded, building her career, caring for her parents, becoming more fully herself in the 8 years that Adwoa was living inside a borrowed version of her. And when the campaign office called, she answered, calmly, with the originals already in her drawer, because she had always kept the originals. That is the lesson this story carries. Not that waiting is always right. Sometimes the truth needs to be spoken immediately and loudly. But that knowing when to speak and when to let the moment come to you is its own form of power. Efua did not chase the correction. She was simply prepared to confirm it when it arrived. Her name is back in the university records. Her name is back in the conversation. Her name is on Kwame Mensah-Boateng's letter, Efua Asante, the best person in Kumasi for this kind of work. She had always been the best person. The record just needed to catch up to what was true. It did. And if you are sitting with this story and feeling something, the particular feeling of a truth that has waited a long time to be confirmed, I want to tell you that Efua felt it too, not as triumph, as completion. She had not gone looking for the moment. She had gone to work every morning in Kumasi for 8 years and done the work correctly and stayed prepared and kept the originals. The moment had come to her, the way moments come when you are in the right place and the world finally organizes itself around what is actually true. Like the Sankofa bird, she had looked back, not to return to the wound, but to confirm that what she had built was real. That the degree was hers, that the name was hers, that the 8 years of building a career on her actual credentials in her actual city with her actual mind were real, documented, and now officially recognized by the people who had, until Tuesday morning in March, been living with a different version. She is in Kumasi, she is at her desk, she is very good at her work, and now everyone who matters knows exactly whose work it is. The record caught up to the truth. It always does, eventually. Efua just understood that earlier than most.